do acknowledgement to country. So as we gather virtually for this meeting, I would just like to acknowledge and reflect on the meaning of place and recognise the various traditional lands that we all dial in from today. So I'm dialing in from Djab Wurrung country in Dunkeld. Please feel free to pop in the chat where you're dialing in from. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present of all the lands we work and live on and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. So my name's Kelly Barnes. I'm a research assistant here at the National Centre for Farmer Health, and I work in mental wellbeing and in the resilience space as well. I work as a research assistant and as a workshop facilitator, and I've got quite a broad range of experience in the ag industry. So I grew up on a farm in the south of England. I studied a Bachelor of Science of Animal Health, and I've worked on farms here in New Zealand and in the UK, and I've worked in shearing teams here in Australia, over in the West as well, and more recently worked in rural merchandise roles before moving to the farmer health roles. So I think I've been at the National Centre for 2.5 years now. So I'm really excited to be running this webinar because this has been a bit of a pet passion of mine ever since I worked in rural merchandise roles, to really see how we can help support those of you working with farmers. So we know there's lots of support and lots of conversation about supporting farmers directly, but not supporting those that work with them. And that can also mean that you're a farmer yourself. So we really appreciate having you here tonight. And I'll just do a quick kind of summary of the National Centre. So we've recently just redone our strategic plan. So our strategic plan now is shaping tomorrow's healthiest farming communities worldwide. And we aim to do that. So guided by evidence, we influence positive change for health, wellbeing and safety in agriculture and foster transformative action on farms. And we do that through our research and our service delivery. I'll just do a quick intro of our other panellists and then we'll hop into the first session. So I have Cecilia here, who's our Business Development and Industry Engagement Manager. So this is very kindly doing the tech side of things tonight, and we'll be monitoring the chat. So thanks, Cess. And we've got Greg Kugel from Rural Bank and Malcolm Rowe from Rural Financial Counsellors and Ken Solly from Solly Business Services. So thank you everyone for joining us and taking time out of your evenings as well. So we'll hear from each of us for around 15 minutes and then we will open up the floor to questions. So hopefully pop your questions in the Q&A or in the chat and we will read them out. That would be great. If you have any troubles or any issues, Cess will be monitoring the chat. So just pop any issues you have in there too. So firstly, I just want to kind of acknowledge that as service providers, you're in rural communities, you're working really closely with your farming clients. You may be farmers yourselves as well, and you often wear many hats. So you're not just working within your role, but you're also playing a number of different roles within that community. So some of the other roles you might play are weather forecasting in the local CFA, being the safety enforcer at home and on other farms. You might go fishing with your clients. You might be the local taxi service for you and your kids. You know, there's all sorts of different roles, marriage counsellors, mechanics, footy club captains. So in those rural communities, there's so many different roles that you actually play being part of that community. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that because it can be really challenging to put in boundaries between work and home. And it can be quite a complex relationship with clients. You often see them out and about and not just within your work environment. And you guys potentially are farming yourselves as well. So you're going through some of the same challenges that other people are going through. So when we're talking about wellbeing, which is one of our kind of key topics we want to talk about tonight, and that includes you and your farmers, probably the best way of summing up is the delicate balance between your resources and challenges. So there's some literature around this, how to kind of sum up the best definition of well-being. And that's balancing those psychological, social, and physical resources with the psychological, social, and physical challenges. And as with anything, we need some degree of challenge to keep us moving forward. But it's when those challenges start to outweigh our resources that things can start to slip. So when we don't have enough resources, or when the challenges become bigger than the things we're already doing to keep ourselves balanced, that's when we can get a little bit out of kilter. So next I want to just pop a short animation on, because it's a really nice summary of all the different things that are happening at the moment. And it talks about the challenges of farming, but I really want to kind of think about it to give yourselves permission to realise all the things you're trying to juggle, and the same for your clients. So there's lots of different moving parts that we're all trying to juggle, especially in farming, because it's so complex. And I think sometimes, especially at the moment, we can lose sight of all the different roles we're playing and all the different things we're doing. So it's really nice to acknowledge these. I'll just pop that video on.
Farming is often promoted as a serene and idyllic profession, but behind the scenes there are many constantly moving parts and silent juggles. Financial pressures weigh heavily, and farmers are at the mercy of commodity market fluctuations and supply challenges. Farm input costs are year-round, but income may only come in once or twice per year. Farming is heavily dependent on the weather. Unpredictable weather patterns, including droughts, floods, and extreme temperatures, can disrupt schedules, diminish yields, and wipe out months of hard work. Crop and livestock diseases, pests, and biosecurity concerns compound these struggles. These might be a local and seasonal disease challenge, such as fungal disease in crops due to a wet season, or they might be a national ongoing biosecurity threat, such as foot and mouth disease. A large proportion of farms are a family-run business, and there can be challenges with family and relationship dynamics, communication, and succession planning. The farm is both a home and a workplace, and the lines between the two often become blurred. Working with living things, be it cropping, horticulture, or livestock, means that tasks are very time-dependent, and the workload often extends beyond the traditional 9-to-5 workday. This can leave farmers physically and mentally drained, with little time for recreation and downtime. Sourcing, managing, and retaining a seasonal workforce can be tricky, and language barriers can add to the challenge. Distance to services can add a logistical challenge, for example accessing healthcare, schooling, earning an off-farm income, or sourcing farm supplies or business advisory services. We're often able to carry one or two challenges at a time, and carrying a heavy load for short periods may be okay, but it's the compounding effect of constant and multiple stresses at once that can wear us down and impact not only our livelihoods, but also our mental well-being.
I think that's a really nice segue into thinking about all these different stresses and how they actually impact us and impact our well-being. This flow and effects of farmer health was made from some research done from Sustainable Farm Families, and it's showing the impact of obviously illness, injury, illness, or disability. But I like to think of it the same as mental illness is exactly the same effects as well. So if you're thinking about all those stresses and those compounding effects, if we're not managing those, or if we're really struggling those, the impacts can be quite widespread. So that can impact that person themselves. So for instance, the farmer, so you've got things like your loss of income, pain and suffering, and costs with health for that person. You've also got the impact on that family. So you've got people playing a carer's role to support that person. There's increased workload, so then people are often taking on workloads on the farm, and that can include children as well, which we see quite often. The impact on the farm itself, so you've lost a key labour unit for that farm. You've also lost a lot of knowledge. I'm sure everyone's quite familiar with people storing a lot of knowledge in their head. So there's a lot of stuff that is really hard to take on in that immediate period. And then you've got an impact on the broader community. And I think this applies for you guys working with farmers and farmers as well, if you're not coping very well and you're struggling, there's a loss to that local community as well. So you've got a loss to the local clubs, a lot of volunteer roles. You've also got a loss to the industry. So people are quite often leaders in that industry and people look up to them. So you've lost that capacity as well. So the idea of maintaining our well-being is really, really important, because I think it has a lot of implications on lots of other parts of our lives too. And I just want to briefly touch on what stress is next. So just to kind of cover off, I guess that's what we're seeing a lot of at the moment, and thinking about all those different compounding things that are happening, all the different things that people are thinking about. People are under a lot of stress, and they're under a lot of prolonged stress. So stress is basically that fight or flight kind of response. It's an increased activation of the mind and body to meet demands. It can be really helpful. So without any stress, we tend to be quite inactive. So we need some stress of some kind to actually keep us moving and get us performing. But it's when that stress becomes too high and it stays too high for too long, that's when we can start to have serious impacts. So being in that zone where you start to tip over and stay in that heightened stress for too long, that can be really challenging. And I've got another nice little animation to show you that talks about the impacts of stress and just some of the different ways in which it can show in your body as well.
Stress is a complicated reaction that occurs within our bodies and minds when we face challenges, demands, or changes in our environment. It is a response to both real and perceived threats, and triggers a cascade of physical, emotional, and behavioural reactions and an inbuilt survival mechanism. Stress is not always bad, and some stress can be helpful to prompt us to get things done. Think about how a change in the weather might help spur us on to get the sugarcane harvest finished. When faced with a threat, our body's natural alarm system triggers the release of stress hormones. This helps us to get ready to confront or flee danger, heightening our senses, sharpening our focus, and temporarily increasing our energy levels, commonly known as the fight or flight response. Once the danger is past, these hormone levels return to normal. Let's take a look at how stress might have been useful for our ancestors. In the wild, our friendly ancestor would have faced threats from predators, in this case, a tiger. When they came across a tiger while out hunting, the stress response would kick in, giving them the energy and clarity to run to the nearest tree to escape from the tiger. This would be a short, sharp burst of energy to get away from the immediate danger. When the tiger gives up and finds someone else to eat, our ancestors' stress hormone levels return to normal, and they climb down from the tree. As we know, with the challenges in farming, stress isn't always tied to immediate physical dangers or challenges. Things don't always go to plan, and often don't get resolved straight away, but the stress response is the same. Back to our friendly ancestor. Another tiger has come along. This time, the nearest tree wasn't tall enough for them to escape, so they have to head to a taller tree 2 kilometers away. They make it to the taller tree, but are a little more puffed, having run further and for longer. Their stress hormone levels have now been higher for longer, and it takes them a bit longer to climb down from the taller tree and return to their daily business. When our bodies face these prolonged periods of heightened stress, it can lead to a range of physical symptoms, including headaches, muscle tension, digestive issues, and sleep disturbances. It also takes its toll on mental well-being and can lead to persistent worry, withdrawal from social contact, sadness, anger, irritability, or difficulty concentrating. Over time, this chronic stress can weaken the immune system, making individuals more susceptible to illnesses. So looking back at our friendly ancestor, who seems to have the worst luck, the following day the taller tree was struck by lightning. A new fierce pack of tigers has entered the area, looking pretty hungry. Our ancestor finds themselves having to run for much longer and away from the whole tiger pack at top speed. They eventually make it to safety after 20 kilometers, but they're exhausted and sore and will take a long time to recover. If the nearest safe tree was over 200 kilometers away, our friendly ancestor would have to keep running and would eventually run out of energy and fall in a heap. Work pressures, relationship conflicts, financial worries, and seasonal demands can all trigger the stress response. These stresses can be ongoing, chronic, persistent, and often subtle. Just like our friendly ancestor, if you stay in a state of high stress for too long, you might also run out of energy and fall in a heap.
So I think that's just a really nice short way of explaining all those complexities that we're dealing with at the moment, being in the season that we've got, particularly here where it's dry. We are dealing with lots of different stresses, but we're also dealing with a really long period of stress. So it's that compounding effect. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom because I know you all came on here to actually get some tips and tricks to help. So that's just hopefully a bit of a background to help you understand how we're all kind of feeling at the moment and what state people are in and what effects that stress can have. And the things you can do to help, and I think this applies to yourselves as well. So there's some really simple accidental counselling tips, so that people might be familiar with them, but recognise, respond and refer. So when someone's in a state of distress, there's some really simple steps about recognising what's going on, responding in that immediate time frame, and then referring them on. And then I've snuck the fourth R in, which is reflecting, because I think it's really important to reflect back on yourselves as well and recognise these things in yourselves when you're working with clients, and obviously recognise and respond to those yourselves as well and in your colleagues. So this is just a bit of a summary that you would have seen in the animation. But what we're really looking for, because everyone's different, is a change in normal behaviour. So whether that's in yourself or with a farmer that you're working with, identifying changes in their behaviour. So it might not always be a single change, but it might be a combination as well. Some of the common things people might say, if you're thinking about weakened immune system, they might make a comment like, oh, I've had every cold or every bug under the sun this season, or, I just constantly seem to be feeling unwell. People tend to get digestive issues, headaches, that tension, things like that. And it's a change from normal. So often when so these are some of the physical signs. And things like fatigue and low energy, it's a change from how you're normally feeling. Some of the more behavioural signs, you can be quiet or withdrawn and irritable and things like that. When I say it's a change in normal behaviour, some people do like to retreat and restore being on their own. So it's not always a sign that something's wrong. Some people actually need that to reboot themselves. And same with sleep. So looking at people's normal sleep patterns, you might notice that you have clients that normally ring first thing in the morning at 7 o'clock and they're not ringing till later in the day, or they might be ringing late at night when they normally don't. Things like that can be really helpful. And it's often a combination of these things. So it might not be one thing at a time on its own, but a different combination of them. Probably the best thing you can ever learn is that people need to feel heard. So when they're in that acute distress for whatever reason, something's happened, or they've something's gone wrong, or they've had some bad news, or they're not really coping, they just need to kind of be heard and feel validated. And I really love this analogy because it's really simple, and most people have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that order. So basically listen twice as much as you speak. So we often find ourselves wanting to kind of jump in and find solutions and have conversations where really people are just wanting to feel heard. Obviously engage them in conversation. So prompt a conversation if they're not talking, and then listen. Ask them a question and ask them if there's anything they need, and then listen to their answer. Ask them if there's anything they're concerned with in the immediate time, and then give them time to listen and validate their responses. So that's really kind of talking about, I understand that's really hard for you right now. So just kind of validating them. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification either if you're not quite hearing things correctly. But I think we all feel so compelled to find solutions, but really the best and easiest thing that you can do is just to listen to them in that time. One of the other things that really helps to reduce stress is the perceived level of control. So it's a really good one when we talk about especially the weather. We have no control over whether it rains or not, but what we do have control is over the decisions we make and the things we put in around that. So this perceived level of control is how much control someone has over an outcome, and that can be really, really helpful to reduce stress. So some of the things, really simple things that you could perhaps do there are giving people options. So if there's something like a choice of chemical that they're going to apply, give them the option to choose. If there's two different options like destocking, give them different options and let them have some control over that. The other thing is reducing demands. So taking some of the pressure off, like there's forms to fill out and that you can help them fill out. Something like that will be really helpful to support them. It might be as simple if you're working in merchandise or providing products that you just offer to drop the products out there instead of them having to come to down. These things can be really, really simple. They don't have to be too complicated. So as our perceived level of control goes up, our stress goes down. So hopefully increasing that control will have a really nice reduction in stress. We don't expect you guys to be counsellors. I think any of you in your roles, you often, quite often maybe feel like one, but it's definitely not something that you need to take on the burden yourselves. So there are lots of different ways to offer support, and our other panelists will talk through some of this as well. But personal supports are referring people to family, friends and partners, connecting them in with social outlets, to formal support networks like your GPs and rural financial counsellors, and then general wellbeing support like your Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Men's Line, those kind of support lines. Some of our wellbeing resources at the National Centre, so there's a steering straight plan, which is a bit of a plan to identify when you're starting to feel stressed, and then identify what things you can do to work with that and who's in your support team. There's Managing Stress on Farm booklet, which is really, really popular. It's got some different tips and tricks in there. There's a list of podcasts which talk about the work-related risk factors to mental health, which are done by farmers and industry experts. So that can be a really nice way to get information across, especially when people are busy in tractors and feeding sheep and things. And then two of the services for counselling support are TX and Rural Health Connect that you can connect people in with. And I will show you our support page at the end of the webinar. Obviously, just responding and active listening is the most important thing. This was an example just of some of the things you might say. So this from flood recovery, but see this rain's causing major setbacks with their harvest. So just recognising that their perspective is really real. Acknowledging and clarifying. So don't be afraid if they're talking about something and you're not really sure what they're talking about. Actually get them to clarify that again and acknowledge what they're talking about, and then just keep the conversation going more than anything. So just keep people talking, and that's where you can try and connect them in with services, or they might need help to link in with some of those services. So just continuing that conversation and then trying to tie them into those services. And I think the most important thing that I really want to get across tonight is reflect on the impact that working in these situations has on you. So don't, obviously for those of you that have flown overseas, the first thing they tell you is put your own oxygen mask on first. And I think that's really, really important. So make sure you're looking after yourself before you take on any burden from your clients as well, because it's really important to be in the best, as best you can within this tight season, to be the best you can to be able to help other people. And a concept that is really, really helpful. So compassion fatigue or compassion versus empathy. So this is commonly seen in nursing, especially. So nurses quite often get burnt out because they're really, really good at helping people. They really love helping people, but they actually end up taking on that burden themselves. So where you want to sit, ideally, is in the nice little green smiley faces in the middle. So you've got compassion for your clients, you're understanding what they're going through, but you're not actually taking on that load yourselves. So when you go to the detachment disengagement, you tend to switch off, you lose that compassion, you lose that connection. You can get quite irritable with your clients or feel a bit of resentment towards them. And then when you swing fully across the other way, that's when you're really taking on their troubles and you're really absorbing that, and you're ending up in this empathic distress or burnout phase. And that's when you're very disengaged and unable to, you feel like you're not helping them enough, and you feel like you can't do anything about their problems. So they're two quite extremes either way, but we really want to sit in this nice compassion stage in the middle where we understand the challenges and we do know what they're going through, but we're not actually taking on that burden on ourselves. And just quickly before we hand over, some of the things that can be really helpful for that is putting in some boundaries, which is really, really challenging, especially in small rural communities. But just some things to have a think about. What is your role and what isn't your role? So as I said, we don't expect you to be a counsellor. If you're a sole trader, who can you look to for support? So lots of people run their own businesses, especially consultants. Who's in your network that you can actually have a chat with and download a little bit there? And how and where do you escalate any concerns? So if you're within an organisation, how do you do that? But also if you're on your own, having some services that you can refer people onto and tap into. Digital connection is really important now. I think we get so much fed through us on social media, through emails, through TV. Be conscious of what you're tuning into and how much of a narrative is negative. It can be really difficult to get out of that mindset when we're constantly fed negative information. And looking at the weather is a really good example of that. Sometimes we can't help ourselves, but just be conscious of what we're actually feeding ourselves. The other thing is things like emails on your phone and being contactable after hours. So do you need to have those things on your phone? Do you need to be contactable, or can you give yourself a bit of space and a bit of time out? And the same, we know in rural communities, quite often you're interacting with clients after hours for various other different reasons. And maybe consider, some common things like, I'll get back to you on Monday when I'm back in the office, or I don't have, that information on me. Try and put some boundaries that you don't talk about work when you're out socially if you can. It's not always easy, and obviously sometimes people need to be on call too, but just have a think about what you're actually taking home and what you're taking on outside of your role. And then just some tips, I guess, to help you recharge. So be conscious of your nutrition, be conscious of your sleep, your exercise. Make sure you're connecting. So thinking back to those 3 resources, make sure you're filling all those different sections. So doing things by yourself, doing things with others. Sometimes just getting yourself tidy and in order at home can be really good too. And don't forget to connect with your friends and family and partners. That's important to have that social contact as well. These things aren't very easy to do. They do take a bit of time and take a bit of practice, but I think it's really important to remember to focus back on yourselves as well during these times to help keep yourselves bolstered and in good health so that you can actually help other people. So that's a kind of a bit of a nutshell of well-being and stress and self-care all in one in 15 minutes, but I'll hand over to Greg next, and then we'll have some questions at the end as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will stop sharing and hand over to you, Greg.
No worries. Thank you very much for that, Kelly. G'day all, and thanks for asking me along. Great to have a chat to you all, and my understanding is people are spread all around the country, so I hope all's going well where you are. what I've been asked to talk about, I suppose, is from a bank's perspective, how you as advisors working with farmers, how you can I suppose assist your clients when they're interacting with banks and so forth. And it's a fine line to walk, and I'll say that right up front for yourselves, because obviously you're a trusted advisor with your client base, but at the same time, obviously you can't provide financial advice, can't be telling a farmer what to necessarily do from a finance perspective. But saying that, there is some really important things that you can do. So, I think a few things to think about, is what's the part of the business or the critical aspect of the business that you're involved in that you can help with, where you've got the specialist skills, where you can help the farmer from that perspective. And how can you help and assist the farmer guide their process with dealing with the banks? So that area of the business that you're involved in, you can ensure they've got the best of knowledge, the best advice to make sure they go forward fully equipped when they have those conversations. So I suppose, as advisors working for clients, what do you need to know to be able to help your farming customer base? And I think a critical one that you often see is for you and your roles, and when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking like of agronomists and nutritionists and so forth, is to really understand what the cash flow or the cash implications or the restrictions are that's on the client or the farming client that you're dealing with. And that can be a difficult one at times, because some farmers will be quite open with you, some of them won't. But if you're providing advice and you're not aware of what the cash restrictions are of that client, it makes it a really difficult situation. And I've certainly seen cases where people have given the best advice to their farmers in the way they're going to approach a poor season or the way they're going to go ahead, but either the farmer hasn't told them what the cash position is or availability, or they haven't understood it, and we end up with a scenario where there's a mismatch between the advice of what we're going to do, but what's the farmer's cash flow ability to be able to actually keep up with it. So that's a critical one. What's the strategy for the year ahead? Can you help them with that strategy in those poorer times? Can you help the farmers understand what the financial implications are of a strategy, particularly if that's going to be a different strategy to take into account a drought or dry season, which is going to be different to what they're normally doing? Can you help them with a growth margin analysis? So, if you can help the farmer understand, so that what's the implications of what's being proposed, they can then help have that informed conversation with the bank, so the bank understands what that is. Also, around the risk aspects. So, often you'll see, obviously, in a dry conditions, you have a change of strategy in regards to the farm program or what's going to happen on the property. But that comes with risks, and what's the risk associated with the approach going ahead for what's going to be happening. So is it a low risk approach? Is a high risk approach? So again, so the farmer understands what's the real implications of what's going on here, and they can convey that conversation with the bank when they're helping them out from there as well. So, and obviously, what's the strategy in regards to cropping input costs, livestock sales and so forth. The farmer really needs to have a clear understanding of what that approach is year ahead when they're doing their budgets. So how can you help them be informed when they're doing those budgets? When's the right time to talk for a farmer to talk to a bank? And to be honest with you, it's the earlier the better. And I know that sounds really simple, but it's actually true. Even if it's just a conversation that the farmer has with the bank to say, hey, look, I think we're all aware of what the seasonal conditions may be. I can see us, we're going to have an issue down the track. I don't know what it's going to be just at the moment, but I'm just letting you know that from a banking point of view is a great sign of someone that's proactively managing what they're doing. And it is a good thing. It gives the farmer some comfort that they've had that conversation, but from a bank's point of view, they know, all right, that person's got their business under control and know what's happening. Do it well before creditors become an issue. I'll touch on that a bit later on, but having a farmer with a significant amount of creditors and then approaching the bank becomes a very stressful situation for all. Get a real financial counsellor on board. I'm not saying this because we've got Malcolm here, but real financial counsellors do a great job, and banks really appreciate what real financial counsellors do because they're independent, and they're a different voice. And they can help with those conversations between the farmer and the bank, and also really help with budget preparations and so forth. So, they're from a banking point of view, real financial counsellors are a great assistance from that perspective. Now, encouraging your clients to talk to their accountant and when they're going through that practice. And I suppose the reason I say that is there can be some real taxation implications on people's budgets. And you'll hear me talk a lot about budgets because when things are dry times and people need money, budgets are really critical. And when when there's you've used the example of where people have been caught short is that they might have had quite a profitable year. They then the financial year finishes. It's 8 to 12 months before they do their tax return. They lodge their tax return. The bill comes due, and we've been using all that cash surplus we had from the year before. We've used that all for inputs, and now we don't actually have the cash to be able to pay the tax on the profit that we made now, what was over nearly 12 months ago. So that's really critically important. The changes that have occurred to the instant tax write-off that's that've been in place for the last couple of years, depreciation pools have been written off, all those type of things. Taxation can become a real issue from that perspective, and even implications of farm management deposits and withdrawing them. And farm management deposits are a great asset for people going into a poor season, but there can also be timing issues around when the best time is to withdraw them as well. And encourage farmers to go to the bank with a clear plan and a strategy for the year ahead, and go with what I'd call a logical and a sensible budget of what's happening. If you're projecting a loss, project a loss. Don't try and make it look better than what it really is. And show a loss, but then also show how they're going to be able to trade out of that position as well. So, what should a farmers be thinking about in the short term and the long term, when things aren't going too well? In the short term, they're real immediate input requirements. So what are we going to need over the next few months to be able to get a crop to grow, to be able to feed livestock and so forth? So what are the real critical costs that's going to be coming up? Animal welfare issues, and I'll touch on that in a bit later on, but at the end of the day, all have responsibility. Farmers, advisors, banks have responsibility around animal welfare. So we're ensuring that the animals are being looked after the best that they can. In times like that, cash flow budgeting and monitoring are just absolutely critical. The farmer really needs to have a great understanding of what's their cash position, what income they've got coming in, what expenses they've got going out. And if you can help them in your conversations around, if this is the cost you're going to expect to be seeing in the next few months, those type of things, and be really clear, will help them have a really good understanding about where they're at and help them having those conversations as well. Where can costs be cut? How can you help that conversation with farming customers around, where you can cut costs? And, sometimes it can be a good thing to cut costs. Sometimes it can actually be to your detriment to cut costs. So, a dollar saved today might cost you $2 down the track. So, but that's a conversation that really needs to be had. So where can you trim things? And what financial assistance might be available? And I'm sure Malcolm will talk about that later on. But what really in that short term, what's the plan, what's the strategy, and just budget to the next production cycle. So if it's cropping, what's the budget to harvest? If it's livestock, what's the budget till the next livestock sale? So beyond that, it gets harder, but you can get some certainty up within that production cycle. In the long term, what's some of the conversations really to have around what's the long term impact of the decisions that are being made now? So in a livestock scenario, destocking or containment areas, both of them have their advantages, both of them have their disadvantages, both of them have their risks. They also have big implications the way you wind your way out of the drought. So really have those informed conversations around, how does that look? And again, same, cutting back input costs can be a good thing, can be a bad thing as well. What's the business long-term drought strategy? What buffers can they put in place in a good year? And what's some of the decision points that they can have agreements within the family that when things aren't going well, when's the time to make decisions? So is that around a certain date when they haven't had a certain rainfall by then, pasture availability, those type of things? And I suppose just being brutally honest, we're all involved in farming. Droughts are a normal part of farming, and we have to accept that. And the best decisions you can make to handle a drought is the decisions you make when things are actually going really well before the drought actually occurs. And if you can having those conversations, and it can be difficult when things are going really well and farmers are thinking about, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. That question, well, hey, hang on a minute, that's great, but also have a think about the next drought that's going to be around the corner. What's the financial buffers that can put in place? Fodder reserves, all those sort of things. When things are going well, farmers have choices. When things aren't going well, they have less choices. So it's just an important one from that perspective. So what support do banks provide in dry times and so forth? So there's certainly the option of interest only terms. So if someone's on principal interest, banks will quite happily shift loans over to interest only to allow it to reduce their cash flow requirements. Deferring payments. overdraft extensions to be able to get them through that next production cycle. Farm management deposits, obviously, when they can come out, what's available, and so forth. The refinancing of hardcore components within overdrafts. If there's been past losses that are sitting in overdrafts, banks can refinance them out over a longer term, reset the overdraft, and allow them to cover their input costs. Another, refinancing higher commitment short-term debts over a longer period of time. And then often you'll see with equipment finance, there's balloon payments on the end of equipment finance. So there might be a 30% balloon, and the bank can restructure that back out over the next couple of years or something like that. So the other important thing is that all banks have got hardship policies, and they need to run to them. So make sure they have that conversation with that their farmers are aware that they're not frightened from that. Banks have policies and processes in place for this, which will minimise interest costs and fees and so forth. And I'll just touch on animal welfare because I think it's really important to think about animal welfare and also personal costs. But a lot of the time the personal costs are can be covered by government assistance and so forth. But banks also have a responsibility of animal welfare for the animals that are being run on their clients' properties, and certainly see plenty of places where someone might be in some financial distress, but there needs to be a truckload of hay or a truckload of grain that needs to come in to feed the stock to keep them going, and banks will fund them to help them go through. So that's that's part of that, is that we've all got a responsibility from there. So what information is required when they're talking to the bank, and how you can help them with that. So it really is a realistic monthly cash flow budget for the next 12 months, and that's really there to help them establish what their overdraft requirements are going to be, and also make sure there's a buffer in there, because never things will go to exactly the plan. A year in, year out cash flow, or a normal year cash flow, because that's what the bank will actually use to assess the serviceability of that debt. So they keep short-term cash flow to understand how much you need, but a long-term cash flow budget to actually understand how they're going to service that debt. And where you really come in important is to be able to help with the assumptions behind that budget. So what's the advice as you, as an agronomist, a consultant, nutrition, a livestock agent, comes in really handy to be able to help inform that budget. So what are those underlying assumptions that's delivered an income of X or an expense of whatever that is landing in this month, and what does that really mean? They've obviously got to provide balance sheets and prior financials, but at the end of the day, the budget is really critical from that perspective. So I suppose a couple of final words from me. If there's one thing you remember out of me rattling on for 10 or 15 minutes, is please encourage farmers to engage with their bank early. That would be the key one, is don't let it prolong. Don't wait until creditors are knocking on the door. As I said, that's a really stressful situation for everybody. If they've got 90-day credit sitting there and they're really hammering to get paid, that's not a great position for anyone when you can plan for that earlier on. A very generalised statement, so take it as a general statement, but what we've seen in property, the escalation in property values over the last few years, really means that in general, a lot of farmers don't have an equity or a security concern. And most of them are in a pretty solid position from there. But when things do turn, where the real concern is their ability to be able to service their debt. So that's why I've sort of talked a lot about budgets and so forth, because that's a critical one. The serviceability the banks are really going to want to know. And finally, look, the best outcome for the farmer and the bank in situations like that is really for them to be able to work together. The last thing from a bank's point of view is to want to have a client that's in default, or where there's a lack of trust or the relationship is broken down. That's the worst case for everyone. So encourage your clients to be honest with your bank about what their position is. Come with a plan. Help the bank to understand the plan. Stick with the plan. If the plan change, explain the change, but just keep that honest and robust and clear conversation open between the bank and the farmers. So I suppose that's where I look at it from a banking point of view, and I hope that helps. And with the conversations you're having with your clients, and you're happy to take questions at the end. Back to you, Kelly.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. That was really interesting. I definitely learned a few things in that, as well as don't be afraid to go to your bank rather than being scared of your bank manager. That's really great. And as Greg said, we'll have questions at the end. Malcolm, I will hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Kelly, and hi everyone. It's great to see all of that list of names there, some familiar, some not. My background, South Australia, then New South Wales, tertiary training in natural resources, financial counselling, and a little bit of mental health first aid as well. I've been a farmer in the last 20 years, and I've also been a small business owner here in Hamilton, which is currently my base. I've been working with the Rural Financial Counselling Service here in Western Victoria for about 8 years, and as I said, prior to that, I was a farmer. The service has been around since 1986 in Australia, and it's federally funded and also supported by most state governments as well. And we look after the interests of farmers, and our charter is very broad. So there's not much that we can't do. Having said that, there are some things, and I'll say them up front. We're not lawyers, so we can't give legal advice. And we're not agronomists, so we can't give agronomic advice. We're not accountants, so we don't do tax returns nor BASs. We're not doctors and nurses, but we actually do help a lot with physical and mental health. If we need to, and when we need to, we refer to those services. So we'll say to our clients, our farmers, you should actually probably talk to an agronomist, or maybe you need to talk to a health professional. Having said that, most services now have mental health professionals working for them in a mindfulness wellbeing way. I'll come back to that a bit later on. What I want to tell you about, a little bit more about how the service operates, how we work with farmers, and what are some of the things that we could currently, or you could currently suggest that farmers might look up in order to either find a little bit more federal government or state government support, or in order to better negotiate with your bank or your creditors. Different things. There are tools and tricks that we would do, but that's not to say that you can't refer them to those places as well. So one other thing, that we are independent. There are 13 rural financial counselling services across Australia. There are 3 in Victoria, 1 in South Australia, several in New South Wales and Queensland. Each of them is an independent service of anybody else. It's always free, and it's a very, very confidential service. So what we do is we go to farmers' places and we sit around their kitchen tables. We drink lots of cups of tea and have lots of lovely conversations. We get the trust of the farmers. We might have a farmer client with us for maybe 3 months or 3 years. It doesn't really matter. Our aim is to get them from their current situation, which is possibly mired in stress or uncertainty, and get them to a better point, a better place. Lots of ways, lots of things that we can do along that track. So, one of the things that not many people know about is a thing called a Centrelink payment for farmers, and it's called Farm Household Allowance. It's about $700 per farmer partner per fortnight, and it lasts for 48 months in a decade, and the next decade starts on the 1st of July. So it's not going to make a farmer rich, and it's not going to pay their debt, but it's actually going to put food on the table. It's going to buy some electricity. It's going to put shoes on the kids. It just takes that little bit of stress away. So if there's nothing else that if you don't know about it already, just think about Farm Household Allowance or Centrelink payment for farmers. It'll take you straight there. Regional Investment Corporation loans. Try not to take any business away from you, Greg, and thanks for that plug for the service a little bit earlier. But if you did find that the current interest rate scenario is such that you're struggling with cash flow, then the Regional Investment Corporation, which is federally endorsed, it's a federal body, it will assist with low interest rate loans. There's 3 of them at the moment. One's a drought loan, one's a farm investment loan, and the other one's an Agri-Starter loan, which encourages the next generation of farmers or new entrants to agriculture, or those that are going through a succession planning process with their families. The drought loan is an interesting one. Even the last few years, when we've had fairly reasonable seasons and reasonable commodity prices, reasonable production, drought loans were still a thing, because an element to that is the preparation for drought. And as Greg said, it's a given. There is always going to be another drought. So you can prepare your farm. So you can go to the Regional Investment Corporation and apply for a drought loan to prepare for the next drought. There's also part of that is managing the existing drought, wherever that may be at the time. And the third one is recovering from drought. So that's the drought loan. The farm investment loan is a bit of a different one. they sort of merge a little bit and they overlap a little bit as well. But in a situation where, in a succession plan where maybe one of the kids has got 1,500 acres out the back or something with no facilities on it at all, and probably an ordinary water supply, then an investment loan can provide them with capital to actually re-fence, put some water on, and potentially buy some livestock. So RIC loans, Regional Investment Corporation loans, a good thing to look up as well. Farm debt mediation is a process that the Rural Financial Counselling Services support farmers with. We provide a farmer support in that situation. And each state has a different organisation that is the independent party in that process. In Victoria, it's the Small Business Commission. In New South Wales, it's the Rural Adjustment Authority. In Queensland, the Rural Industry and Development Authority. I think in South-Western Australia, the Rural Business Development Corp. And I think Tasmania and Northern Territory and the ACT are just working on getting some sort of a similar facility together. So if it comes to the point where your loan is in default and you're struggling and the communication with the bank has failed, then through that business commission, the independent body, you can re-engage with the bank and get the communication going and get to a point where you agree as to how your facility is going to be managed from that point on. So it's sort of like a recovery. It's almost like a lifeline sort of a thing. And we sit with farmers in that process and support them through it. That mediation will be deemed to happen on a day, and hopefully you would get to an agreement at the end of that day. It's independently facilitated. I said it's low cost, and it really certainly does get the communication back on track. And I would echo what Greg said as well, that if you feel communication has broken down with the bank, then simply pick up the phone and talk to someone at the bank and let them know that you're having a problem. Certainly engage, if you want to, with the service, with the Rural Financial Counselling Service as well. We also do or help farmers with informal mediations, and that might be just simply getting your stuff together, getting a farmer's stuff together in order to do a bank review. That could be a cash flow budget, or it could be a projected budget, maybe projected out for a couple of years. Cash flow budgeting is probably inherent in everything that we do with a farmer in order to get a focus on what their business can actually do. Sometimes we wonder a little bit about the usefulness of a cash flow budget, because it's only as good as the day it's done. Within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, it might be out of date. But the beautiful thing is that if you've set one up, and if it does tell you a story, then you can visit it and you can revisit it as things happen. And sometimes I think that farmers are climate event managers or rainfall event managers. And so they're always in that flux between either having too much or not enough, or just enough, or the timing is wrong. So if a climate event happens, it means that you probably need to revisit your cash flow budget. We do often sit down with farmers and just do a simple farm financial health check. Look at the farm, look at the resources, look at the supports that the farmer has, look at where they are in their life as well, and start to talk about what would you do if you weren't farming? Where would you be if you weren't farming? Start them thinking about life after farming. Really important part. That takes us through to succession planning, of course, and we do quite a little bit of the preliminary work for succession planning, whatever that looks like in the end, whether it means that the land is sold or subdivided or handed down to different members of the next generation is really probably the third, fourth and fifth step. But getting all of that together in the first instance, having the conversations and making sure that every person is involved in that succession planning conversation is really important. Really quite fun because everyone is different and there's no rules to that. So we can't actually apply a formula to a succession plan because they're so diverse. At that time of age, let's say people are departing farming, and hopefully they will do so with some financial stability, can sometimes be rocked by ill health or sudden accidents or those sorts of things, which means that aged care or ill health care is an important part of that ongoing evening part of life. So we will talk to farmers about aged care and what it means and whether or not they have some sort of a facility set up which might actually cover that large cost of going into an aged care facility, and what happens to the other partner at that time. Where are they supported, and are they looked after? What happens to the farm in that instance? So in all of that, where does that leave us? Why do we do this? Why does the federal government support and provide money for the rural financial counselling services across Australia? Largely, I believe, to manage the well-being of farmers. We do it, we come in from a financial perspective. And if people are a little bit anxious about their finances, and generally, if their finances are not going so well, they will be anxious. Our job is to somehow or other relieve that anxiety. And we'll do it by taking responsibility for things. Yes, we'll do things. Farmers can tend not to do the financial stuff. You know, they'll put it aside. They'd prefer to be on the tractor. They'd prefer to be behind a mob of sheep. So we can help in that way. A lot of financial difficulty doesn't come from bad management on the farm. There's not too many farmers, sure, there are some who aren't good managers. Not too many that are bad managers. It's a whole heap of the other things that they can't control that probably have contributed to the financial difficulty that they get into, to the point where those things, due to relationship breakdowns, due to a death in the family, due to different times of the family as children grow up and move on from the farm, but are still dependent upon mum and dad's assistance to go through university studies, those sorts of things. Financial stress can come from all sorts of reasons, and it doesn't matter. So we don't judge as to why someone might be struggling. But what we'll do is certainly get in there and ask them where they would prefer to be and try and work out how to get them there. So the mindfulness or the well-being part of the service is really important in that sense, because their anxiety is often relieved by fixing up a financial issue that they've got, but the underlying thing actually is not related to the finances, if you get what I mean. We would say to farmers in that sense, and we will pull in our wellbeing counsellors to sit down and talk with farmers. Just an interesting little statistic, I think it was in 2022, 2/3 of farmers in Australia were on a mental health medication, which is a significant number of farmers. You might not think that. I think we normally think that farmers are a little bit stoic and they probably don't worry too much about their mental health, but there are so many that have already embraced a mental health professional. We'll do a lot of cognitive behaviour therapy work with farmers, and that is just simply talk about stuff that isn't the farm, identifying for them who their off-farm supports are, where their off-farm happy places are, who is the mate that they will talk to, that they will call when things get seriously dark for them, and basically define that as being non-farm things. So oftentimes farmers will be wholly and solely focused on the farm, will not do anything else. And so to try and break that and to extend their thinking beyond the farm is really quite important. That's about it, Kelly. There's more that I could talk about. That pretty much covers everything we've done. Oh, one more thing, sorry. With that mental health space, having been a farmer, there are times when let's say your stress threshold is being bumped into. There's just 3 or 4 or 5 things happening. You've got no buffer. And you'll work that out one day when the smallest of thing happens, which then suddenly tips you over that edge, and the levels of anxiety just erupt and carry on. What we would do is try and bring you down from, or manage that level of anxiety, so that you do actually have a buffer. The day that, I don't know, a mob of sheep gets boxed up or something like that, and you think, oh, crikey, you just got to draft all of them off again. If you had 4 or 5 things that had been building up, you may not actually have capacity to manage that extra little bit of stress. So to manage that underlying base load of stress is a really, really important thing for farming communities and for people like you who deal with farmers in your daily lives. To understand, to try and understand and ask the question as to where do you reckon you're at on your thermometer level of stress? Have you got 2 degrees to go before everything boils over, or you're back down at 45 where you've got a bit of buffer between there and then? That's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Mel. And I could definitely listen to you for another half an hour. It's really interesting. And yeah, your stat was pretty grounding. I think it definitely dispels that myth that farmers don't want to seek help. I think that's very much an old adage now. Finally, before we open up to questions, I'll hand over to you, Ken. I've got Ken's slides here, so you just give me a yell if you want me to share or on to the next slide, but I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I'll have a discussion first, Kelly, about some of the things. Sometimes as a consultant, you say you're do as I say, not as I do, and I think I'm probably the oldest person in the whole audience tonight. So I'll share some things that I've learned through hard knocks and stuff. And one of them was I ended up having a major mental breakdown in 2019. So for your audience to avoid that, I think now that boundary management for yourself is really important. If you set that boundary management of being home by 6 o'clock from work, definitely not working on a Sunday, learning how to package yes better. I could never say no, but I learned how to package yes better, and buy some time to think before you actually decide. You get rung up, can you help us with this? And we all say yes. But if you buy a bit of time, you can probably put some provisos on it that takes a lot of stress away from you. And, another boundary management, never be contacted in holidays. Having your own trigger points of knowing when the wheels are starting to turn up and really acknowledge it. Like in my case, I've been a major contributor to the Fines Department of the Victorian Government and South Australian Government and speeding and all that sort of thing. So I'm pulling my weight in that department, but I had 4 speeding fines in a short period of time. Well, there's an underlying problem there that you should be reading. So I always think it's important you learn how to read your own tea leaves, and you might have a series of stuff ups in a row that should trigger some thought. How many hours you're working in the week. If you're just constantly working long hours, that's got to trigger something. Your mood swings and your sleep deprivation, which we all suffer from. And even having a near accident should be a trigger point for you to step back or think hard about what's the underlying reasons for that and having some pressure relief valves in your own life, and making sure you're looking after yourself in terms of that annual medical checkup. Having had prostate cancer and the organs removed, I reckon I've encouraged that many people to have medical checkups, and I reckon there's been a lot of prostate cancer found as a result. Then, pressure relief might be a long weekend, or even if you really enjoy going to the pub on a Friday night, that could be a great pressure relief. And one of the groups I worked with last week, the young fella said, well, I decided I was going to ring my mate, and they go into the gym at 6 o'clock, on 3 of them on a Friday morning for an hour, and then go and have a coffee, and then they go start work at 8 o'clock. So having those little pressure relief valves, I think for us as consultants, I think the value of mentors is just so undervalued in this country. And being an old and bold, rugged and buggered sort of bloke, I find now my mentors are the young people that in the mentoring process, for me, a lot of time it's a two-way thing, but you've got to really get a mentor who can, that you utterly respect, and they can give it to you straight if they believe that you're in danger. They're not going to sugarcoat it. Getting that referral network around you and having the names and the telephone numbers of each of them, but also gaining the permission for you to refer people on to them. And I've actually had to deal with clients that I've thought that are in a bad way, that I've actually went with them to the first appointment. Now, we all know our businesses, if they're going to be successful, you've got to be really good relationship marketers. But that doesn't mean you need to get in the pocket. And I've got far too close to a lot of clients. I've done eulogies at funerals. I've spoken at 21sts. I've proposed toasts at weddings for clients and that. And, that was just part of the overall deal of bringing me down in the long run. I've been in the workforce for 50 years now, and I've never had long service leave, which I reckon is one of the dumbest things haven't done in my life. I reckon they're there for a reason, and we should take them. And I'm a great believer that your annual holiday has to be at least 3 weeks to allow the repair, because most of us in the people game, and it's pretty high energy stuff. And making sure we have at least 3 long weekends in the year, and when long service comes along, for crikey's sake, take it, because it's there for that purpose. I talk about reading your own tea leaves. Try and establish that space between you and your clients, not get too close. Know where your line in the sand is between your expertise and where they're trying to drag you, and always begin with the end in mind. So if you go onto a client's property, I once had an elders bloke came to me, Kent, and said, "Ken, can you help me how to manage clients?" Because he said, "I went to a client's property last week and it took me 5 hours before I could get away from the property." So it's important when you go to a client's property that we say, "Well, I've got my next appointment at 1 o'clock or something. I need to be away by 12, so that they respect you and they don't drag you into their net." Now, managing time, we all know in consulting, time is your currency, really. And in my life, in my career, I've driven 2.5 million kilometres. If you divide that by 80 kilometres an hour, that's 31,000 hours at 40 hours a week. It's 780 weeks by 48 weeks a year. It means I've been sitting in a car for 16 years of my working career. And thank goodness we've got technology that can bring that down. But that's what creates a lot of stress for you, because you've got to try and make a full income in the balance of the time. And then the driving tends to force you out into because we've got a large country, and once you get a level of expertise in certain areas, to really earn the big dollar, you've probably got to travel a bit. So learning how to manage that. So just while you're bringing up the screen, Kelly, I just think I want to share with you a few of my long-term beliefs. Long-term success in a business, it's not how high you fly, but it's how well you bounce. So after this year, as consultants, we've got to help them bounce as quick as they can. And a lot of the bounce is about the decisions we're making right now to help them get through. And every decision on a farm has 2 costs. There's the cost of doing it and the cost of not doing it. And I did an exercise on 1,000 composite ewes, and I had an increase of 3% in ewe deaths, 10% down on lambing percentage, 10% down on wool production, 2% down on carcass weight, keeping extra replacements to replace the dead ewes, and then having a lower conception rate for next year on 1,000 ewes. That was $48,000 of lost production. So once you know what the cost of not feeding adequately is, it can quite often change their approach to how much they will actually feed. And quite often that's the least cost. If we destock properties, you must work the recovery plan out before you destock, because the destocking may not be the right thing. And I reckon as a consultant, one of the skills I've learned is to listen for the stories that are not told. You would expect that client to be talking about this or that, and they don't bring it up. And a lot of the time when you hear, you can't hear these stories are not told, you then gives you the opportunity to ask questions in those areas. And quite often that's the problem area that's causing the greatest stress. And I'm just saying to the people now, you've just got to have 100, the next 100 days is when you have to have a plan, because presently I've done 5 workshops in the last 2 weeks, and the majority are in that 30 to 40 age group, and they haven't lived through an autumn like we're having now. So they don't have the skills or the aptitude to handle what's going on. I'm sure they will handle it, but they don't have that background. And that's why having a mentor, I reckon, who's been through it before can be great. And we need to really learn the lessons out of this this whole autumn. We do a lot of fast learning and fast forgetting, and as Greg pointed out before, they've had a lot of equity put onto their balance sheets in recent years. If they have to burn a little bit of equity to get through this, then I think that can be a pretty sound decision. If you bring the screen up now, these are the sort of things that I'm talking to farmers about. And, you know, I'm not one of these corporate companies that wants to protect intellectual property. What you're seeing on the screen now, I think, is just basic common sense. But when we get under stress, quite often we can't see some of the obvious things. I keep reminding my clients that, you know, this situation is not of your own doing. And I explained to them, you knew this one was coming. You can't have 7 good years in a row and think that they're just going to keep going. In agriculture, you must expect the unexpected, and out of adversity comes the seed of an equal and greater opportunity. Things learned this year that they'll be able to use every year from here on. So it's not all negative. And making sure they get their priorities right in terms of physical and mental health is number 1, then the families 2, and then the businesses 3, so on and so forth. I've seen farmers who go to the fire brigade meeting on the night of their wife's birthday, and that's basically telling their wife that the fire brigade's more important than what she is. But if we can't get the physical and mental health right, well, all those other 5 are just totally compromised. Getting that best plan in place. And a lot of the stress is self-induced because they keep focusing on the glass half empty rather than the glass half full. Those 5 areas of mindset, plan, structures, chemistry, and culture, I think if we can get those 5 right, then we're in for a good time. And because farmers work on their own, I'm encouraging them to do a bit of self-praise or self-talk. And if we catch them talking to themselves, that's okay. And, you know, remain focused on some good things. There's always good things going on, and don't ever feel sorry for yourself. So moving forward to the next slide, I'll quickly, worry. When we look at what worry is really and broken down, and it makes farmers reflect and saying, well, yeah, I've been a silly bugger. I've been bloody worrying about things that might never happen. They might too, but, you know, let's worry about things that are real. So a lot of the worry is self-induced and poor use of energy. Next slide. I think, you know, through this time, it's making sure that everybody's on the same boat, you know, that we're pulling in the same direction, and reminding them as a leader of their family, you're always setting an example. Make sure, like Greg talked about, make sure you're dealing with truth You know, don't create excuses. We'll listen to reasons, but not excuses, and just work on the best plan being in place. Once it's in place, then you should not worry because you've done due diligence in the development of the plan. And most importantly, agree not to argue. Agree to disagree, particularly at this particular time, because we don't want additional stress as a result of arguing. And I encourage them not to discuss problems in bed. You know, I think that's sleep comes a close second to oxygen. Moving to the next slide, will do. I encourage them to get off the farm as much as possible, even though they've got to be there for feeding. If they're having a shocker of a day, I encourage them to have a fish and chip tea in the park with some local friends that cheer them up on they feel good being with, and do that on a regular basis. If you're short-tempered, read your own tea leaves. Sort of, you've got to, particularly through this time, you've got to manage yourself better. Acknowledge the good deeds of others, and others will then probably reciprocate. Do more with your kids. They don't have baggage. And try not to be the problem for somebody else. We've all got that person who's a pain in the bum that you have to put up with all the time. Well, make sure you're not that person, and keep doing the very things that sustain you. So in that case, I've mentioned about Sam and going to the gym at 6 in the morning with a couple of his mates, then have a coffee after it. The next slide quickly, Kelly. Talk a little bit about happiness chemicals with my work with Let's Talk here in Warrnambool, the mental health organisation. I'm a lived experience speaker, so I talk about what happened to me, how I recovered, what I learned, and what my trigger points going forward are. So those 4 chemicals there and how we can get them. Sometimes a person can look at that and say, well, geez, under serotonin, I'm inside in my office. You know, my mindfulness is not all there, and I don't do much walking. So just doing a bit more in each one of those categories can just make a little bit of an improvement. To the next slide, tactics for the best. I think keeping a journal this year is really important. Is writing down the things you learn, the things you won't do, and recording your ideas for when they come up. When this season comes up next time, you've got a good reference there. Getting that 100-day feed plan in place, ensure the farm budget for the next 6 months is really bedded down correctly. And I've said to a lot of clients, this year break even could be an outstanding result. Even making a small loss could be a hell of a good result under the circumstances, because I don't want them being hard on themselves when they've actually performed well under the circumstances. You know, for a lot of people, the unknown is more stressful than the known. So, you know, doing the what if scenarios is important. And I say to them, if they're worrying, quite often they haven't asked enough questions or gained enough information. And having a fallback position, how often do you use the second cartridge in a double barrel gun? Well, I wondered whether having the word gun in a talk like this was appropriate, but my point is that, you know, your first and foremost position, circumstances may not go in your favour, so you need to know where you can go the next time, where your fallback is. So your success is dependent on that. And this year in the sheep and cattle industry teaches them condition score is hellish and good insurance. You know, I look at a lot of farm budgets and they might have $15,000 worth of insurance. Now, I'm not going against insurance, but having fodder reserves or FMDs can be great insurance. Then a final, I think one is, we've got one more, have we? No, we might have two. Quite often the results of having poor and dead sheep is more stressful than the cost of extra feed. The cost of not doing it can be greater than the cost of actually doing it. Rarely is spending on extra feed an absolute waste of money. You can always buy rainfall in a sheep enterprise, but not in a cropping enterprise. We want rainfall in a sheep enterprise to
grow feed, but we can still feed sheep when it's not raining. If you're sheep in containment, I encourage them to use the saved time to do constructive things on the farm. Seeing something physical that you create is terribly rewarding. Don't go back in your cave and keep being creative and constructive. Things that make your farm look and run better will always do great things for you and turn negatives into positives. So all the speaking engagements I've had in the last 3 weeks, I've used my mental breakdown as a means of turning that negative into a positive by sharing it warts and all. Stored feed is like having insurance. Well, the next slide must be the last one. Oh, shit. Sleep comes a close second to oxygen. Keep working on your attitude. I had a mate who bought a station up in the pastoral country, and that was quite a good season. He bought it and he said to me, Ken, I can't wait for a bloody drought to see how good I am. So he attacked the drought with a really positive approach, and I want to see people do more of that. And try not to let the situation get any bigger than it really is. And I reckon extra expenditure this year should be spread over the next 5 years, and burning a little equity may be the best way forward. And meeting at the local fire shed every Friday or every second Friday for a short sizzle sausage lunch, just so that you get that camaraderie, that shared experience, making people realise that they're not on their own, and you know, get them in an environment where they can actually talk openly. Getting a retired farmer to come and do some feeding might be an idea. I talked about the fact that the season like this can change you into a person that you don't want to be, and that's sad, because you may not ever be the person you want to be if you allow a whole thing to get out of control. And I encourage them, tell them that asking for help is a strength. It's a good thing to do, and I'll remind them they're not on their own in this circumstance. And the final one is reflecting on the 2 circles, which is the final slide, hopefully. You got that, Kelly? Yeah. This is the most basic slide, but the most beneficial slide I've ever produced in my career. If you had your best friend and they told you that their daughter or son had a drug addiction, a drinking problem, or a gambling addiction, you'd be rather concerned about them. But I find that most farmers have got a farming addiction, and inside the outer circle, the green bit is their farming life, and the little dot in the middle is the rest of their life. And what I spend a lot of time is encouraging them to find ways to make that dot in the middle a little bit bigger, which might be off-farm investments or more community involvement or whatever, so that they get some of their self-worth out of that. In farming, the 2 most important things we need are the climate and the markets we've got no control over. So when they go out the window like now, a lot of farmers' self-worth goes out the window as well. So I put that up to show them in this time, hoping that it'll have a bit of impact, because when I put it up when times are good, all I want to do is make the green bit bigger. So I'll stop there, Kelly.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. I think I was busy trying to jot down some words of wisdom, but I ran out of paper in the end. I think that was very informative, and you've definitely got lots of experience to draw on there. So, and thank you for being so open. I think sharing our struggles is a really, really good way for us to show other people that everyone has challenges, and talking about ways to work through them can be really helpful. Just conscious of time, so if anyone does need to jump off at any point, please feel free to do so, but we will open the floor to some questions. So if anyone has any questions to ask any of our lovely guests tonight, fire away. If you'd want to pop them in the chat, that will be perfect, and we can have a look in there. and I will fire a couple off to get us going. I might go to you firstly, Mel. So can you just tell us what the eligibility criteria is for the farm household allowance?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so very broadly speaking, if a farmer has less than $5.5 million worth of net assets, so add up all of your total assets, which will include your share portfolio, farm management deposits, house at Port Douglas, Cayman Islands Resort, and farm, take away everything that you owe, that's going to be your net asset. That has to be less than $5.5 million. To have made us a loss in the last, or a small profit in the last financial year, is also part of that process as well. We don't actually, as councillors, we don't second guess that. If someone comes to us and says, I want to apply for farm household allowance, we'll say, yep, sure, we'll give you, we'll support you through that, but we'll send it off to Centrelink and they will assess that. So $5.5 million net assets, either a loss or a small profit. If one of the farm partners has some off-farm income, then that off-farm income can be offset against the loss that was made. And so essentially the small profit I talk about is sort of somewhere around about $56,000 profit for the last 12 months when everything's considered.
Excellent, thank you. Hopefully that gives people a bit of a guide to get started and feel a bit more confident talking about it. I've got a question for you next, Greg. So I guess farmers are a bit reluctant to approach their bank to ask for assistance, and especially during really tough years like this one. How would a farmer prepare a budget and put forward a plan when there is so much uncertainty?
Yeah, look, that is a common question from people and Mel was spot on. You know, the budget's only worth the piece of paper it's written on for the next 2 weeks. But the important thing about that budget is there's usually a reasonable amount of certainty around your cost structure heading forward up to your next production cycle. So if it's the next harvest or whatever. So you can usually get a pretty good grasp around that, and the unknowns will be your price and your yield and all those type of things. But the important bit is really to have the underlying assumptions to that budget. So if you understand the underlying assumptions, us at the bank understand the underlying assumptions, and they change, that's fine. And everybody understands that. So I think you make the best effort you can with the knowledge that you've got on the day that you do your budget, but you then be willing to adjust it, move it as you go, but have a clear understanding of what the drivers are behind that. And look, it's not a perfect science by any means, but the art in it is really to be able to ensure that you've got clarity about how you set that budget to start with, and then how you are going to adjust it as you go forward according to what gets thrown you as you go. So
I think that's a really great point, Greg, about being able to adjust it. We quite often think we're going to get stuck and we put that in, so we don't want to put anything in. So that's a really nice point. Can I just have one last question for you? If you could offer our lovely participants on the webinar today one piece of advice, what would your first and only piece be?
Good one. I'd reckon that remember your personal health has got to be number one. It controls your productivity, your outcomes, your enjoyment of life, your success as a family man, as a community person. And you know, if you work solidly on your mental health, then I think you've got a 90% chance of having a bloody good life, I reckon. Yeah.
I think that's great. Thanks, Ken. And I think it's so hard when we're so keen and we're so ingrained in our communities and we really want to help people. But I think that's really, really important to note as your one priority is looking after yourself first. So, and thank you for sharing. I think that's it. If anyone has any last minute questions, I don't think there's any in the chat. I'll just hand over to Seth. She'll just pop up a quick poll if you wouldn't mind. We're really interested to know if there's other topics you want to learn about or that we can put on as a future webinar. So if you just pop some answers in there, if you have any, and just a quick rating, that would be awesome. And then, as I said, we'll send an email to follow up with some links to resources, any bits and pieces our panelists might like to share, and some links to where you can go and find information on our website. But thank you everyone for taking the time out of your evening to join us. I know it does seem a little bit ironic when we talk about self-care and looking after yourselves first, and then we do put a webinar on in the evening. But I think you'll hopefully appreciate it and have got something out of it tonight. So thank you so much, everyone, and please do reach out to us at the centre if we can support you in any way, and reach out to the other guys on the panel too.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks everybody for completing the poll, and I'd just like to, on behalf of Kelly and the centre, just thank Greg, Mel and Ken for their insights. My takeaway, I suppose, was really that, you know, whilst, you know, we all wish there was a magical pill of what we could tell you is going to work for, you know, for your farmers and how you can help them. Really what I heard tonight was that there is really important to actually be looking after ourselves and yourselves too. But, you know, that information around how you can assist people to understand what they can be doing to, you know, control some of those finances is really great. And, you know, speak up early, speak to your bank, speak to your financial counsellors. And I think that's, you know, a really great way that we can all support our farming communities as well. So thank you, everybody, for your time this evening.